All right, guys, moving along here to episode 6, mean reversion versus range extension. So a very key part of this entire system is to mark the prior day high and low of all instruments. I know that you guys saw us doing that within the inverse VIX last video, but understand that we're also doing it for ES, NQ, and RSP. So more specifically, by monitoring how ES and VIX interact with their prior day high and low, we can better assess whether the price action within ES is more likely to exhibit range extension or mean reversion. So before we get into this information down here and head over to TradingView to go over some examples, just remember that VIX always is evaluated first and before ES, because VIX will give us context and directional bias for ES. So just a key point that we have to touch up on again. So what is range extension? Range extension refers to when price moves beyond the previous session trading range. So it'll break above the prior day high, below the previous day low, and then continue to move in that direction. So here's a photo for you guys. ES breaking above and sustaining value beyond the prior day high, exhibiting range extension. So what is mean reversion? Mean reversion occurs when price reaches the prior day high or low, fails to extend beyond that range, and then rotates back towards the center of the prior day range. So ES attempting to break below the previous day low, moving back up, rotating upwards, exhibiting mean reversion. So what conditions in the inverse volatility index, the instrument that we're analyzing first, will typically lead to range extension within ES? So as we're looking at the inverse volatility index, if it is breaking above and sustaining value above or below its prior day high or low, then this will typically lead to range extension within ES. Key point here is typically. Don't treat this as some sort of like static rule. It's not always the case, but it is typical. So now we can head over to TradingView. Here's a chart of the inverse volatility index. It is Friday the 30th of January 2026, and then the next session is Monday the 2nd of February 2026. So same thing over here with ES, and we established this range here on the 30th on the VIX, and then the next day, after we've marked that prior day high and low pre-market, during the intraday session, we can see the inverse volatility index breaking above and sustaining value above its prior day high. So VIX itself is exhibiting range extension. And so then when we go to the ES the next day, we've marked its prior day high and low before the session open, then the market opens up, and we can see that ES follows VIX. The VIX is sustaining value above its prior day high. This will often lead, and within this example, to ES sustaining value above its prior day high. But remember, I'm just going to say this again, that we're always looking at the VIX before ES. And a very key part to this is that we have to wait for it to sustain the value. It could be the case that ES breaks above its prior day high, but we can't get jumpy, because it could be the case that it just reverts back to the downside. And if we're caught longing up here prematurely, then we could just get trapped and not be in a good position, right? So waiting for it to sustain value is important. So this is the typical condition for range extension within ES. And now we can move on to the mean reversion conditions. So when the inverse VIX is trading within its previous day range, while ES is attempting to break beyond its previous day range, or when VIX attempts to break its previous day range and fails, then these are going to be the two conditions that typically lead to mean reversion within ES. So now we can head over to TradingView, and I'll show you guys an example of this. So again, same exact times, 15th to the 16th on VIX and ES of January. So here we establish this range in both names, and then on the preceding session, on the 16th, we can see VIX attempt to break below its previous session low. This attempt fails. Price does not sustain value below the previous session low and is bought back up into that previous session range. So it failed, essentially. On ES, after we see that VIX fails to break below and sustain value under that previous session low, this will oftentimes, and in this case, lead to ES mean reversion. So we can see as a result, or not as a result, but again, oftentimes, when VIX fails below that previous session low, then ES will typically lead that behavior. And so another example of typical behavior in the inverse VIX that typically leads to mean reversion within ES is that, let's say that the prior day low within VIX is right here, and that the inverse VIX never attempts to break below it. It never even reaches the previous day low. But we can see over here that ES did attempt to break below its previous day low. This is another condition that will typically lead to mean reversion. So that is mean reversion and range extension within VIX and ES. This becomes especially powerful when, let's say there's a demand zone here within ES, and the VIX is exhibiting behavior that suggests mean reversion within ES. And when you just have stacked confluence, like maybe the point of control is right here, maybe the overnight low is right there as well, then this can become super powerful. But we'll touch up more on this later on. But for now, let's head over to the next video, which is going to be defining NQ and RSP.